guys, I'm Mike.
And I'm Ash.
And this is F1 Fanatics. Welcome back to another F1 Worldwide podcast. And a couple of weeks ago, we were across the pond talking... Well, we weren't across the pond, but we were talking to our neighbours across the pond there with Race Fan Heaven. And we are very happy to welcome another American podcasters from Chicago. And that is the Outlap podcast. So, guys, thank you very much for coming on.
Yeah, thanks for having us, man. Yeah, it's a pleasure to be with you guys.
No problem. I really appreciate coming on. And just for our kind of listeners, I kind of obviously hinted it there with the podcast, but do you want to guys give a quick kind of rundown of what you guys are and what you kind of do?
Yeah, so like you said, we're the Outlap F1 podcast based out of Chicago. We like to say we're the highest rated Chicago-based Formula One podcast in the world. Can't prove me wrong on that so far, so that's pretty good. You can find us on Twitter and Instagram at Outlap F1 Podcast. And we have an awesome website that John's buddy actually built for us at outlapf1.com. So, yeah, this will be our first full season of the podcast. We started probably about a third of the way into the season, I'd say, last year under the Outlap moniker. We had a different podcast we used before that. But, we're excited to start this year off fresh with the new pod, and it's awesome. One of our favorite things about Formula One and the community is meeting guys like you, just like through Twitter and things, and becoming buddies and talking Formula One and kind of appearing on each other's stuff. So this is awesome so far.
No, we just kind of love having you guys on. It was amazing. Obviously, we've communicated on Twitter in terms of that front. Enjoyed it. Obviously, you guys recently had a very big guest in Saber Cook, didn't you, in your last podcast that came out? Well, it probably won't be last one by the time that this one comes out, but you guys should definitely check out when that comes on. But yes, we are F1 fans and we just love talking F1 at any opportunity. And that is what obviously leads us on to today, F1 Worldwide. We talk about topics in Formula One. John is a Mercedes fan and James is a Ferrari fan. And we're going to go with one of their teams, and it's not the Ferrari one, it is Mercedes. And Mercedes this year are on the verge of history. If they win the Constructors and the Drivers' Championship this year, they will be the first team in the history of the sport to ever win 7 back-to-back consecutive Constructors titles and doubles in terms of Constructors and Drivers, which is pretty impressive. So, I think... we direct it towards you, John. On the verge of history, how long do you kind of, if they achieve this, how long do you kind of see them carrying on? Do you see it's just a continuous bandwagon that the Mercedes machine keeps funneling on?
Yeah, I kind of feel like we're jinxing it by talking about it now. I'm a very superstitious sports fan in general when it comes to all my sports. So, I feel like I may be cursing myself, but I mean, as far as, 2020 goes, obviously a lot could change in preseason testing. We know there's going to be some sandbagging going on. Of course, Ferrari will probably be 4 seconds out front, and Mercedes will, be towards the rear, and, they'll all be, Toto will come on and tell us that they're struggling and they're worried and all this fun stuff. So we'll play that game for a while, and then we'll see how it all shakes out in Melbourne. But, my gut instinct tells me that from the 2020 season, certainly you've got to think they are the favorites. When you've got 6 in a row, no one has yet to take them off the top of the hill. And in all honesty, no one's really come that close either. Got a couple little scares along the way, but it's been relatively smooth sailing for Mercedes standpoint. I'm still waiting for that kind of bubble to pop there. But that's the thing. If they win... As a Mercedes fan, I would love for them to extend this out. But now that they're in Formula E and obviously they're in multiple series around the world as well, it kind of makes me question, what would be their motivation to continue? Is it just to continue to throw it down Ferrari's throats and just kind of stomp on them and press that issue? But Ferrari's got quite the gap when it comes to overall, Constructors' Championship. So if we're thinking, we're talking they'd have to be around for a whole heck of a lot longer to even come close to that. So a part of me in the world that we live in with sponsorships and just the nature of how series are changing and 2021 coming up around the corner. A part of me feels like I'm a little worried that if they do happen to win, they would lose some motivation. But I am feeling a little bit better now that they've signed a couple of longer deal sponsorships. I know things aren't quite wrapped up with Lewis, but a part of me thinks as well Lewis is going to want to prove that he can win and get another evolution of a Formula One car. So if he can do that, I think he'd be the most of all time going through different configurations of Formula One cars. So I think that's a motivation for him. Certainly his relationship with Mercedes is deeply tied at this point. So I think honestly a lot of it hinges on Lewis Hamilton, which is a little bit crazy, but I feel like as long as he wants to keep going, I think they'd be crazy to pull out and lose out on kind of that cash cow that is him. But I imagine that he's only got a few more years in the tank as well. I don't know. It's a tough question. What do you guys think?
I massively agree. It is a tough question, which is why it's always fun to kind of discuss and go on a topic there. I think you raised some good points. The Lewis Hamilton one, I think he is key to the future. And Lewis himself, I think by this time our kind of our predictions video is out in terms of our driver lineups, and we can't really see him leaving Mercedes in 2021. Even if he doesn't win this year, it just seems crazy. The whole setup that's around him at Mercedes, they're just a very well-oiled machine. Everything seems to be going in the right direction. They're on the verge of history. Like you said, the gap is massive between them and Ferrari. But, when you're on top in sport, it's very rare that you can kind of dominate for so long. So, yes, there is the kind of incentive to go out while you're on top. But there's also do we just kind of see how many we can win while we are on top? But James, be interested to hear your thoughts.
John mentioned the sandbagging that we're gonna witness here coming up in the testing, and it's already even started with Mercedes. And I think it was Andy Cowell, their engine boss, is already talking about some issues they're having with the power unit, which I don't believe for a second because it's Mercedes. But I almost think of that's part of what they use as the motivation to keep them going for title after title. And Toto Wolff, he's awesome at it. He's an incredible leader, and he's really good at humbling himself and his team. And I think that's what they use for their motivation a lot. Because, like you said, when you're on top for that long, it's really hard to continue to be on top. Because when you're on the bottom looking up, it's like your motivation is to get better and better and be that the king of the hill per se. So that's probably, even as a Ferrari fan, the thing I admire most about Mercedes is that they can continue to have that drive to go after title, and it's just like machine-like precision, just year after year after year. So with Lewis and Toto together at Mercedes, it's like until one of them leaves, I don't know how they're going to get knocked off their perch. One of my hopes is that Lewis, somewhere in him, wants to win a title with 3 different teams, and with the greatest Formula One team in the history of Formula One, that being Ferrari. If he wanted to leave, then I could see maybe Mercedes run ending, but besides that, it's going to be tough to see, or tough to do.
Yeah.
See, the problem is, guys, with us living in Chicago, we're not used to sports teams being on top for very long, so we're a little cursed in that regard. We've had a little bit of success along the way, but we don't sustain that success, unfortunately. So this is kind of new territory for James has never seen sustained success. So, and it's new for me, even as a Mercedes fan.
I was alive for the Bulls' 90s run, so relax over there.
Oh, well, it's... And also, you got to remember, were you in F1 at the early 2000s stage? Obviously, at that stage, the Ferrari dominance of 6 constructors' titles and, 5 back-to-back constructors and drivers. I'll try and pick you up a bit, James. John's putting you...
And thank you, but the only problem with that for me is... The only time I get to enjoy that is if I'm watching F1 TV, some of the older races, because I'm still a relatively new fan to the world of Formula One, so I didn't even get to enjoy my team's heyday.
Oh no. Well, James, we'll try and find a positive throughout we go. But Ash, we'll get your thoughts now on, obviously, the Mercedes being on that verge of history. I suppose bringing the sandbag in a bit as well, because it is always amusing when Mercedes do it. And your thoughts on their future participation.
Well, the sandbagging is something we always talk about, but I think it's been hit on enough times that do we buy it? And the obvious answer is no, because it's every season. If they did it occasionally, then yeah, maybe you buy that as an excuse as to why they're off the pace in testing. But it's one of those, it's going to happen. The thing with Mercedes is they have got such a good team. It is one of those where you look at the driver lineup and you think that is harmonious. Even when you look at Bottas at the end of a race weekend where he has been completely dominated by Hamilton, you can tell he's disappointed by it and wants to improve, but in him he knows that is his position in the team. Over the course of a season, Hamilton, in terms of points to teammate, has only been beaten twice. And that was Jenson Button in the year after Braun, 2010, wasn't it?
2010.
2010. And then Nico Rosberg, who won the World Championship.
Was it 2011?
It
was
might
one
be.
of them.
It was 2010 or 2011. So when you're against a driver that is that consistent, you're always going to struggle against them. But having him in the team is fantastic for them, because they've got that clear number 2, but they've got a driver of a calibre that is able to consistently be in and around the podium. That was the issue we were all looking at Red Bull last season. They had Max Verstappen, who can challenge for wins, and then Albon, unless something happened in front of him, he wasn't really going to challenge for that podium, which is where I think their championship fight that's the downfall of their championship fight. With regards to records, it is one of those where when you're at the top, you have to be motivated by something external to the sport. So if you haven't got someone in the sport to aim for, you have to look at in the past. And Mercedes, they've been breaking records all over the place, getting close to others, and in terms of overall championships, they're not going to be able to touch Ferrari. So Ferrari are at 16, I believe it is, and Mercedes as a constructor is 6. So, 10 more. That's a long period of dominance for them to get close to Ferrari. In terms of engine suppliers, though, that's a lot closer. Mercedes will be on 8 or 9. How many did McLaren get?
McLaren won 3.
So they'll be on 9, that would be then. So that's a closer battle, but I don't think that's something they're going to be aiming for. And we said it in the discussion beforehand, and it's already been mentioned. The thing that will determine Mercedes' dominance in F1, but also their longevity in F1, will be that partnership of Toto Wolff and Lewis Hamilton. Last season, all the reports were that Toto Wolff was being looked at as someone to move into the FIA as was it technical role he was going into?
Yeah.
And at that stage, if Toto Wolff was to leave, I think Hamilton would be quite quick out the door, because the two things that were tying him to Mercedes were Niki Lauda and Toto Wolff. Whenever you listen to any interview he has, they were the two that convinced him that the Mercedes project was right for him. So I think it would be one of those where he wouldn't necessarily want to stay on at a team without that support network around him. And that would be the thing. He would then move to, it would have to be one of the big teams. And in terms of challenging for a title, the move would be to Ferrari. And if you're putting Lewis Hamilton into the Ferrari of last season and the season before, that title battle is a lot closer. So if Hamilton was to leave Mercedes, then their dominance, I think personally, that would be the end of it. My opinion overall is Hamilton is the one that is creating the most out of this dominance. The team is built around him, and he is so efficient with his nature in driving that even if that Mercedes was to be, I don't know, 20, 30 brake horsepower down, you would still see him competing at the front and being able to score highly enough to challenge for a world title. So it's how long they can get him tied into a contract that will be the deciding factor on that.
I think coming out of that, if we see a big deal, like a 4-year deal or something like that, then I think as a Mercedes fan, my nerves calm down a little bit. But yeah, you're right. I think Lewis Hamilton is kind of really the hinge factor there. And if Toto leaves, that he's already lost, obviously, unfortunately, one of the two people that really drove him there, as you mentioned. And if Toto leaves, it makes you wonder, like, where does he go? But the other factor is, and I know as much as James hates on Lewis Hamilton, I know he'd gladly take him at Ferrari in a heartbeat. But and I'd probably have to buy some Ferrari crap too, because I'm a massive Lewis Hamilton fan, which would just pain me in so many ways. But with them signing that long-year deal with Charles, it makes me wonder. You talked about like having that clear number two. I don't see any time in the remotely near future where Lewis Hamilton is going to take a number two role. And we've seen what happens, Ferrari being case in point, when you've got two guys who think they're number ones, and what happens there. Having Bottas, if Bottas was a number one and Lewis Hamilton left, you're right, I don't think there's any way that they maintain championship form. And even, talking about in the Mercedes realm of things, the one time that Lewis Hamilton was beat, it was extremely close, and reliability, in my personal opinion, played a big factor in that overall season when it comes to the final point count. So I don't see him going to Ferrari because of that. I could see him retiring, and maybe just moving back to going to New York, where he spends so much time with. I keep trying to tweet him and tell him to come to Chicago because it's a hell of a lot better than New York, but that's a different story. But yeah, I don't know if he'd want to clash with this young gun, and he can't, like the same thing at Red Bull. I don't know if he'd want to clash with Max either. So it brings a whole other kind of twist to where his mind is, as opposed to like where a Mercedes is as well.
I think that makes a very good point what you said there, John, in terms of it. Look, Lewis Hamilton, probably out of the past 2 decades after Michael Schumacher, has been the smartest man in terms of his movements within F1. I know he's only been at 2 teams, but it was still the way that he's kind of manipulated those teams into totally being Team Hamilton. And he always strikes me as a very calculated and logical individual. Yes, Sebastian Vettel to me is the more emotional one. He moved to Ferrari because Michael Schumacher link. He wants to win a title with Ferrari. Hamilton, to me, I want to win records. Mercedes want to win records. I have a team around me who I'll be at number one with for however long I want to be in Formula 1. Well, obviously to the extent that he's not like going around as a back marker, but I don't think any of us would see Lewis Hamilton staying in the sport for that long. But yeah, I think massively on that front, his logical idea would be, I want to stay with Mercedes. So they've kind of almost trapped themselves in a contract together. If Lewis stays, they stay. If Mercedes leave, Lewis leaves probably. Your thoughts on a bit more on Lewis, obviously, James, with shutting down that prospect of a Ferrari move potentially.
Yeah, I mean it's a good point. And I'm a huge Charles Leclerc fan, along with being a Ferrari fan. So I wouldn't root for Lewis Hamilton coming to Ferrari. I also wouldn't root against it. I would enjoy it. But the only other thing I could see if he didn't stay at Mercedes, or if him or Toto were looking for a new challenge and Toto didn't want to go into more of a Formula 1, an FIA role, something like that. Like, there's been some rumors, with Aston Martin coming in with Lawrence Stroll, buying up a share of them. And then there's some talk of, Toto leaving and doing something with Lawrence Stroll. Like, I mean, if they get bored enough, I guess, Toto and Lewis, maybe something crazy happens, and the only way I could see Lewis leaving then would be to go to the Aston Martin racing, whatever it ends up being at that time if Toto goes too. That could be interesting, and then it gives them both something to like try and build together and get to the top one more time like that. But I also don't see that happening unless Lewis gets his 7th and at least ties Schumacher before trying to go somewhere and starting all over. Or maybe even after an 8th, if we have to live through that. But, I mean, that could definitely be a challenge for them if that's what they're seeking, you know, because, like, they've been dominating for so long, they've got to be looking for some sort of new challenge.
Yeah.
So, quick point, James.
No, you go ahead.
So I'm glad you would. I know you would gladly take Lewis Hamilton because that's your only shot of winning a constructor championship. So I just want to make sure that you throw that point out there. But yeah, I want to ask you guys as a group. Do you think the Lewis Hamilton contract conversation? I know they've been going on for quite some time now, and we've had rumors here and there about the status of that, and Mercedes and Lewis Hamilton have both squashed a lot of those rumors, which I expected, even if they were true, that they would squash them just for publicity's sake. But do you think that these things could draw out through the 2020 season? And Lewis is saying, like, hey, if I get one more, do I switch? If he gets beat this year, does that make him say, okay, I want 2 or 3 more chances at Mercedes because I think they're going to be the best team moving forward? If he gets that 7th and ties Schumacher, I wonder, does he wait to sign a contract until he knows or has a pretty good indication of whether he's going to win his 7th this year and then make a decision? I don't know. What do you guys think on that regard as far as the timing goes? Because it's weird. He's in the last year of his contract. I'm sure he doesn't want to sign a New Year deal. If he is thinking, like, hey, I ever want to go somewhere else, I got to think, as James said, you want to get your 7th now and then try to start a brand new challenge somewhere else. So the timing is kind of funky on his behalf as well.
On that one, his best opportunity to match Schumacher is obviously going to be this season. The Mercedes at the moment, it is the best all-round package, and I think the 2 teams around here that are going to be able to get close are going to have times where they're going to take points off of each other or not be able to compete. With regards to his contract being up at the end of this season, I think that's more just clever negotiating, in the fact that obviously we're going to have the 2021 regs that we're all saying it's such a big change and that could change everything, but it is also one of those where actually it might not change anything. So he's in a position where he can jump ship if he wants at the end of this season. For me, I don't think he will. If he matches Schumacher this season, I still think we will see Hamilton in a Mercedes next year. But it's one of those where, say next season we have a resurgence of a Williams or a McLaren. If Hamilton then starts putting feelers out saying, I'm looking to move to a team, no matter who their driver lineup is, they would consider Lewis Hamilton. If he wins the championship this year, he will be a 7 times world champion. If not, he is still a 6-time world champion. So it is one of those where if a team has an opportunity to sign him, they will try. And I don't think there's a team out there at this moment in time that can look at both of their drivers and say, we're better off sticking with these than taking a risk on upsetting one of our drivers to have Lewis Hamilton as their partner. So it's one of those where even if he was to stay at Mercedes next season and Mercedes completely drop off the pace because they don't get the regs right, I still think he would have the strongest negotiation power of all by just turning around and saying, I am 6 or 7 world-time champion. One thing to put out there though, you're going to have to clarify if I'm right on this, but isn't Fangio the only driver that has won a world championship with 3 different constructors? Because he was Maserati, Mercedes, Alfa Romeo.
And Mercedes.
No, it wasn't. It was Ferrari, wasn't it?
No, he won the first championship with Alfa Romeo.
Farina won it. Was Farina that won the first one with Alpha?
Fangio did win it with Alpha.
Okay, well, it would be I think Fangio is the only driver that's won it with 3 different constructors. So Hamilton's already seen in the light of Fangio, Schumacher, Senna, Prost as one of the best drivers. So to go out and to do it in a 3rd constructor, I wouldn't put it past him. And he will have that opportunity if he wants it. And I think that's the thing we've got to look at. It's if Hamilton wants it, rather than a team being like, we want Hamilton. He's the one that's going to be... He will have his choice of seats. If any seat was to come available, he could choose to go to it if he wanted.
And what would your thoughts be on it, James?
Well, first, I just need you to check your buddy Ash and make sure he's okay. Because a couple minutes ago, I'm pretty sure he just used the words resurgence and Williams in the same sentence.
Yeah.
Right.
I also was like a bit like that. That's not a resurgence. That's a whole new lifeline. It
was used as an example in the fact that we could, if the 2021 regs are going to have as big an effect as people have been saying, we could have any of those 10 teams at the top. It's unlikely. Like, I can sit here now and say that the top 3 constructors next season, so once the regulations have changed in 2021, will still be Red Bull, Mercedes and Ferrari. They're the teams that 9 times out of 10 would be at the top. But if it's another one of those where if is one of the biggest words you can use in the world despite being 2 letters, if it was to happen and Hamilton wanted to, you'd get rid of Russell or Latifi for Hamilton. Let's put it that way.
I think what Ash is trying to say on that front is Williams are a British team. They're very successful when we're very sad that Williams have kind of dropped to the lows they're there. So it's a much clutching at straws to go, maybe.
It might happen. It's unlikely, but it might.
But anyway, James, we'll let you take over.
Yeah, well, I totally agree, first off, about the regulations. They could really change everything, and that's what makes it so exciting. And that's another reason why I could see Lewis leaving and going to a different team besides one of the top 3. Because that's kind of what he did when he left McLaren, no? Like, he saw that Mercedes was going to be on the right path and, made the best decision of his career. Similar to what Danny Ricciardo got wrong just before this last season, when he thought what he saw from Renault was going to, move them in the right direction. And so he put all his chips in their corner, and that has not paid off for him thus far. But yeah, I mean, there's a lot of things that can change. I personally hope, obviously, that Ferrari stays towards the top in 2021. But John's been a McLaren fan for a while now because of Lewis Hamilton. But I've actually become quite a McLaren fan throughout the last season. And I'm hoping that they can continue the momentum, not just into this year, but into 2021 as well, and really nail it with the new regs. Because I could see that as an English historic team that could really take off and get to the next level, to give us fans, a 4-team battle instead of just kind of a 3, but really just, a second and third place team battling for second while Mercedes runs away with it every year.
Yeah,
something I want to
absolutely.
Ask
No, John, jump in.
Who do you see as having who do you see as being an engine supplier for Aston in 2021?
Well, this is an interesting one. I've heard mixed reports on this, because I'm pretty sure, like, as an engine manufacturer, you're only allowed to supply 3 teams on the grid. And Williams are tied down to a long-term contract. McLaren have just tied down to a long-term contract, and we've already just suggested that Mercedes, I think the general consensus that we feel like Mercedes will be hanging around by their kind of deals that they're signing, and it doesn't really look like their future is away from it. So it's not really something that's been spoken about, but it doesn't seem like Aston Martin would be able to have a Mercedes engine, but it seems to be like presumed that they will. They're not, obviously Aston Martin and Mercedes are linked anyway. I know they took over their DTM slot, but obviously they've pulled out because of there was some issues there, so it was only the 1 year. But they are linked in other racing series, Aston Martin, Mercedes. So it's the logical one for them to be linked, and that's, if they do leave, you can very much see Aston Martin becoming Mercedes' sports brand, essentially, and Formula E being Mercedes' road car brand. So, in answer to your question, John, I reckon probably Mercedes, but I'm not too sure about the kind of finalities of how they can work out that contract situation in terms of powering a fourth team.
I agree with Mike on that one. The rules are quite clear in the fact that you can only supply 3 teams, so that would be Mercedes. If Mercedes was still in, that would be the Mercedes, the McLaren and the Williams, because of the contracts that have already been signed. But I wouldn't put it past Aston Martin to put together their own engine. When you look at the DTM side of things as well, it wouldn't be a surprise if they were to come up with their own. The only thing with that is Ross Brawn was quite clear in the fact that they didn't want any new engine manufacturers or constructors for the 2021 regs in 2021. So,
before I throw it back to you guys, I'll pose it as a question. So we've just had that thoughts, and I hear the thoughts from you, John and James. I think we'll go to John first on this one. But like I said there, obviously Aston Martin, Mercedes being linked, there's plenty of ways around these things. Do you reckon it could come in, like Ash said, as an Aston Martin powered engine, but Mercedes is essentially who built the engine? It's just under the Aston Martin name.
It would be no different to, was it not last season, the season before, with Red Bull, when they had all of their arguments with Renault. If you spoke to Christian Horner or anyone like that, it was a Tag Heuer Aston Martin engine that was in the car, but it was a Renault. So it is one of those where could something like that be their way around it?
Yeah, so John, we'll head that question to you first.
Yeah, I think that's an excellent point about Red Bull, because as I was thinking through this, I feel like in all racing series, especially in Formula One, there's always these little gray area loopholes that these teams pay people millions of dollars to find, and I feel like that could certainly be one of them. So yeah, maybe it is an Aston engine built in an Aston facility, but perhaps it's completely filled with either current or contract type situations from Mercedes. Former Mercedes employees, a whole bunch of them that suddenly take over, and in secret, of course, they're all still getting paid by Mercedes. So I'm sure there's ways around this whole situation. And I think, going back to Hamilton, his relationship has been with Mercedes for so long now that, James, when he brought up Aston, I think, if he wins the 7th one, he's looking for a new challenge. You mentioned the relationship with Toto and Lawrence. If he's looking for a new challenge, that could be it, but it'd be difficult, I think, for him to break ties with Mercedes. But however, if they're powered by Mercedes, or if they have some kind of wink-wink, nod-nod agreement with Mercedes, I think that could open up more doors for him as well. So I think it's certainly possible for them to get around that rule if they really wanted to. I get the reason why they wouldn't want a new constructor in the actual year 2021, just because of the complexity of stuff. The difficult thing with Aston, if they didn't try to pull any kind of partnerships with someone, is when we talked about removing part of the MGU, I think that was going to bring in a lot of constructors. Porsche had looked at creating an engine. I think they actually did develop an engine as well. Having the current format has been so problematic for constructors. Renault's still trying to figure it out half these years. Obviously, we saw how long it took Honda to start to get their ducks in a row. It almost makes me wonder if that would scare them away from developing their own engine. But if you've got Mercedes investing in that and providing a lot of technical allegiance with them, then that takes away a lot of those concerns. So it's not like they'd be starting from scratch.
Is Racing Point's contract with Mercedes to be their supplier, is that ending after this year?
I believe it was.
Seeing that, the last thing I remember seeing when McLaren made the announcement that they were going to make the switch in 2021 was that Mercedes will be supplying 4 teams with power units, including themselves.
Yeah, that's what confused me.
That was something I was just about to say. I'm pretty sure the wording of the regulation is that you can supply 3 teams. So they are supplying 3 teams. Mercedes isn't.
And they're a works team.
Are a works team.
Yeah.
So I might be wrong on that one, but that may be the way in which they can get round that one, because they're not supplying an engine to themselves. So it might be that.
It would make sense, because I feel like that would be a huge news story, because then Racing Point / now Aston Martin would be fighting for Honda or Renault, and Honda very much seemed to be it's Red Bull and nobody else, so it would then be Renault there, and nothing's been spoken about it. So I essentially presume that this is all good and okay to go. Like you said, James, I think the contract's good to go.
The other equation is we still don't know what Honda's going to do. I personally hope they stick around now that they've got stuff figured out with their MGU, and they have fixed a lot of that reliability and can start developing power. But if they pull out, then you legitimately have Aston, you would think, would want to try to capitalize on that kind of potential cash cow that is Red Bull, a Toro Rosso or whatever they're calling themselves these days, and potentially their own works team as well. So that the Honda deal could sway things. They haven't confirmed past 2020 either. So there's definitely a lot of moving parts, especially when we think, going back to our original question, is Mercedes saying, I feel like there's a lot of other pieces that they're kind of waiting to fall into place before they kind of make these decisions.
But if Aston Martin wanted to start designing their own engine for Formula One, wouldn't they have to start doing that like yesterday?
Yeah, absolutely. Unless you've got a wink, wink, nod, nod with Mercedes, then that if they're trying to start from scratch, and the fact I would be concerned if they were trying to make the 2021 grid and hadn't started yet. But obviously they have a deep, rich history in racing. You guys correct me if I'm wrong. Do they have any experience at all in a hybrid motor? I'm trying to think of through WC and these type things. I don't think that they're running any type of hybrid, so that this may be their first venture into that regard.
Yeah, I'm not sure on that front. I know they do have they race in the WEC GT class. I'm pretty sure on that front, but they certainly don't not in any sort of single seater or. I don't think they really have much experience in terms of building a hybrid engine. So
I'll put one bit out there for you. So the current Aston Martin hybrid that is being designed, and built, is called the Valkyrie, and the chief engineer on that is Adrian Newey. In terms of actual racing with a hybrid, they haven't done anything. So it would be a complete step into the unknown on that. So
yeah.
The other thing is too, I read the other day, I can't remember which organization put it out there, but I believe, if I remember correctly, you guys correct me if you know as well, that as part of the Lawrence Stroll and his backers, their investment into Aston was that they pull out of some of these, hypercar, supercar type designs and really focus on vehicles that are going to maximize profitability. So although they may have some things developed, I wonder if they're going to continue to have a piece in that, or because of their financial woes, to try to focus more on more traditional and better selling units.
That was you're correct on that. That was one of the things that was stipulated because, as most people are aware, Aston Martin as a company haven't been in the best financial position, and it was seen that it was them trying to break into that hypercar market that was causing a lot of that. So there is a look to try and restrict going away from the history of the company a bit on that.
Oh, it's a very fascinating point, and I feel they definitely would compete in it one year because the Valkyrie's pretty much built. So they certainly would do there, but I don't know if anyone knows with WEC how well the hypercar section of it will do in 2022. So yeah, it'd be interesting. But I think, we'll bring it back to Mercedes, and I think how it decided there.
There's a lot of moving parts that if they fall in one place, Mercedes stay. If they fall another way, Mercedes could leave.
Exactly, and I think it's a complicated question, and rather than it kind of being a simple question on that front. Is there any last points you guys would like to make on Mercedes and their continued involvement within the sport?
Just that, as much as I root against Mercedes, I don't want to see them leave the sport, that's for sure. I don't want to see any team, even my most hated team being Renault, I don't want to see them leave the sport. I'd like to see maybe a team come in, but I want to keep it at least 20 cars on the grid.
Yeah, I think that's a very good point. We certainly, the way that they've spoken about new teams, it would be, it wouldn't be great for have it to drop down to an 18-car grid, because I think as fans we want, that's 2 less seats for favourite drivers to kind of fill, and as fans we're kind of almost wanting more seats rather than less. John, anything from you?
I think just the last thing for me is that although again I'm a hardcore Mercedes fan, when we talked about motivation earlier and do they try to go out on top and et cetera, I also don't want a world where we're talking about like 10 straight championships, because although that's fun for me, it's not fun for a lot of other people. And as much as I'm a Mercedes fan, I'm even more of a Formula One fan. Since I saw my first race, more than a decade ago, I've been hooked, and I want the sport to grow, and I want it to continue to develop, and I want it to continue to be the thing that people say, holy cow, like, look at that car. That thing is amazing. It's beautiful. It sounds amazing. It's the cream of the crop when it comes to motorsports. And I know that if they go on and continue this reign for years to come, that may drive away a lot of people. So I am one of those people that really hope that 2021 shakes things up, even though it may potentially hurt my own team, just for the success of the overall sport itself.
No, I think that's a very good point that you make there, John. Us as F1 fans, we're already hooked. We're the ones that they don't need to worry about, essentially. They put on a race and we're like, yeah, let's go. Mercedes were like, oh, it's frustrating, but I can't help but just admire the absolute brilliance they do to kind of get consistent. But anyone else, I always use this kind of you'd be like meeting someone new, like, why should you get into F1? Well, everyone's who's going to win. Lewis is going to win each year, and who's going to win the teams. But it's great, honestly. Trust me, it's great. No, you're going to win, but it is great, promise. But it's a bit of a hard story to kind of sell on that front. And
I agree.
I think what we'll do is, I think we do have time, which is quite nice, and I think it'll please James to kind of get a bit of Ferrari talk in there from that front. So we'll start with you on this one. So obviously Mercedes and Ferrari are the 2 biggest spenders within Formula One. How do you think both are going to cope with the budget cap being introduced in 2021? I don't imagine the effects will be felt in 2021, but for the subsequent years after that, how do you think they will cope? So I will direct that one first at you, James. How do you think Ferrari will cope?
Well, initially, as far as the 2021 season goes, I mean, this year, 2020, they're probably going to spend like crazy. They've got unlimited spending because they can spend as much as they want on development and all these things this year in preparation for 2021. So I think that'll be a big part of it. I also think that a lot of the focus this year is going to be on next year, even more so than in other seasons, because that's going to be what it's all about. They want to get this jump start, and they want to spend the money where they can. The cap, I think, is $175 million, if I remember correctly. which sounds like a lot of money, but it's not cheap running a Formula One team. Thankfully, some of the salaries aren't included in that, like driver salaries, which drivers tend to get paid quite a bit of money, especially on the top teams, and then some of the other, like the top engineers and things. So, it'll be an adjustment, but I'm looking forward to it, honestly. I think it'll bring a little bit more parity into the league, which is always a good thing. In American sports, you find a lot. The leagues that have more of a hard cap are a lot more competitive year in and year out. Like, for instance, the NFL, our football league here, has a pretty tough cap for teams to get under. So we have some pretty nice parity. Of course, we got some dominant teams, but you really have to be a special kind of franchise or team to work within the boundaries that are laid out. So I think it adds another element of strategy for the teams, which scares me a little bit as a Ferrari fan, because strategy doesn't really seem to be their strong suit most of the time. But I think it'll be good for the sport overall, and kind of bunch up the field a little bit, if nothing else.
And John, I'll ask the same question you. We're assuming that Mercedes will stay. So how do you think Mercedes will cope with this budget cap? Because they are by far the two teams who've spent exponentially in this period in the hybrid era that were probably the main reasons why this budget cap has come in.
Yeah, I think that for 2021, I think they'll be fine. To James's point, I think they're going to spend a ton of money this year in preparation for that as well. If I was Mercedes, I think I'd have a whole team dedicated solely to 2021 outside of my current racing division, and just have them, here's a blank check, basically, go to town and get us as prepared as possible if we're going to stick with this thing. After that, though, a couple years, once things start shuffling through and we have minor design changes, and who knows when we start talking about, there's been talks about 2025, go into a new motor. When we talk about things like that, part of me is concerned that they, and Ferrari for that matter, may struggle. We've seen teams like Racing Point or Formula One, Force India, and how teams like that did so much with so little, was so competitive despite having basically pennies in comparison to the big teams. And if you apply it to like the business world and such, it seems like when you have all the funding in the world, when that's taken away from you, it seems like large organizations sometimes struggle because there's so much complexity and they're being stretched in so many different ways because they have the budget. It almost can have a chaotic effect when you've suddenly got to start reining that in, and you've got to make decisions on personnel because you can't afford to pay everybody that you were and things like that. So I imagine 21 through 22, 23, maybe they'll be all right. But if they continue to hold into this thing more of a long term, I think that they're going to have to make some serious adjustments and start asking some serious questions internally in order to try to maintain success. And I'm hoping that we see teams like, Racing Point, obviously as Americans, we'd like to see Haas not suck for once. That would be a nice change and not be embarrassed to put a Haas shirt on. So, James, you talked about the cap in the American sports, and I agree. I think this could very much level the playing field. Do I think it's going to happen in 2021? No, probably not even in 2022. But as we go a little bit deeper into this, I do think that you may get these quote-unquote small market teams that start putting together their pieces and making a run for things. So, but yeah, I think going back to Mercedes, I think they're going to have to ask some serious questions once we get a year or two into this deal, because I think it could be more problematic for them because of the fact they just have really an unlimited check at this point.
Yeah. And Ash, your thoughts on this?
I think it's more repeating what's been said, really. We're not going to see an impacted budget cap for at least 5, maybe 10 years, really. Like, when you've got teams spending whatever they want, really, at the moment, they set themselves up. If you're a team that's competing near the front, you're going to try and set yourself up as much as possible to stay as competitive as possible whilst you've got as few restrictions in place as possible. So it is one of those where we're going to have to wait and see whether the budget cap actually has an effect on allowing teams to close that gap as much as people expect it to. Long term, I think it will, but it's one of those where it is a long-term fix, not a short-term. So don't expect any real surprises for a while on that one.
Yeah, I think kind of trying to put together the pieces of what you guys have said. I think, yeah, very much it would take the most optimistic of F1 fans to think that there would be the hugest of shakes-up. Like, they would literally have to... I think you're right. They'll be given a blank checkbook, both Ferrari and Mercedes, and Red Bull to an extent, although they can't compete financially on those levels with those guys. To kind of get it right, and in 2021-22 you'd expect them at least to be near the top. For me, out of the two teams, I'm sorry here James, I worry about Ferrari the most. Not historically, they're brilliant and they've been fantastic, but Mercedes are a team who are spending their enormous budget well, and it would be difficult to do there. You could say that this is then a positive for Ferrari, that that they could, with a limited budget, they'll have to send smart. But for me, they could either rise to the challenge and really relish under the fact that they have this budget cap, they have the name of Ferrari, so they can still attract top talent with the name of the team, or it could go to bad levels, 2009 Ferrari, where they get the regs wrong, and they haven't. If you put the team at Racing Point, who will become Aston Martin, compared to Ferrari, and you put them on similar budgets, you'd probably say season out, in terms of the personnel and what they're producing, that the Racing Point team would probably come out on top and produce the better goods. And I think John made a very good point with it, and James as well, in terms of if you're a team used to kind of not having much money, then you're always maximising what you can get out of it. If you're a team who's used to, if it goes wrong, you can just chuck an extra 100 million or whatever stupid amount of money that they're spending on it to fix the problem, then there's no risk, and you're not used to kind of being under pressure that your decisions might make, where the Haas, the Racing Points, the Williams, every decision they make as a team is, well, almost team defining, because if they cock up and they go bad for 2-3 years, that could be them out of the sport. I mean, you look, and if Williams continues like this, we could be talking that Williams are out of the sport in 2022. We hope not, but that
free up that engine for Aston Martin.
It certainly would do, but yeah. So that solves the issue. Sabotage Williams to the extent of there. But you know what I'm saying in terms of it's a difficult one on that front. But I think we're very much right on there. Is from what's been said by others. James, is there anything you would like to add to the discussion?
No, I'm pretty much agreeing with both John and Ash on what they're saying. I'm just hoping for some parity.
The one thing I would say, just to play devil's advocate, because it has been a Mercedes-heavy discussion, if you look at the history of Formula 1, teams have periods of dominance and then fall away. We've had it with Williams, it's happened with McLaren. You can go even further back and say like Lotus, things like that. Ferrari have always been there or thereabouts. They have the odd season or two where they don't compete as well as they could, but they always seem, it's one of those where the cream always rises to the top. So in terms of with the budget cap and who's going to come out worse out of Mercedes and Ferrari, I'd lean towards Mercedes. Only because Ferrari have been there, done that. They've got the history in F1. Mercedes, they've got their recent history, and then they've got history going right back. They're not an ever-present. So, I with the budget cap, I'd put my support on Ferrari being the ones to make the most of it out of the two teams. And if you watch our videos regularly, I like Mercedes and Hamilton, but unfortunately, that's the view on it.
I think you make a good point in terms of that front, because the history of Ferrari, it is the most historic team in F1. It is the most successful team in F1 history. You know, someone like Lewis Hamilton, who's had his success at McLaren, who's had his success at Mercedes, still that kind of just the allure of Ferrari. There's something, it almost has that bit of a kind of sex appeal for drivers, I think, on that front, that they go, when Ferrari come calling, it's the temptation is always there. And I think in a budget cap, even if they weren't quite getting it quite right, I think they will always attract top talent to the positions because Ferrari, in terms of that. John, anything to add on to the discussion?
No, I mean, I actually agree with that as well. You know, even if you talk about just someone who doesn't even really know much about cars, but when you put a Mercedes and a Ferrari next to each other, even the best Mercedes in the world, I would probably bet that majority of the time, someone who's imbalanced or unbiased, I should say, is probably going to lean more towards that Ferrari. And you talked about that sex appeal. So I agree. I think because of the fact that Mercedes has had so much success, and it kind of has come fairly easy for them in the grand scheme of things, I think that, you know, they haven't really been tested. And I agree. I think, you know, Ferrari has certainly been tested. They've been around since the beginning of time in Formula One, and they've seen it all. Yeah, they've had a couple of, you know, funky years along the way, but they've always been on the upper side of the grid, even in some of their crap years. So I agree. I think that if you had to ask them to, I would say that Mercedes is definitely more at risk of coming out of this deal in a bad way. And yeah, I think Ferrari, like I said, as much as I don't like them, I think that they, you know, there's very few companies in the world that have that type of appeal that a Ferrari does, you know, especially even within, obviously, the automotive industry. But they've always got the allure, and, you know, even going and visiting their headquarters as a non-Ferrari guy, I was basically drooling all over the place like a kid in a candy store. Just, you know, I think I took 3,000 pictures in one day of Ferraris, and I'm not even a Ferrari guy, because it brings that emotional connection with you, and that's, you know, they're going to have that appeal to drivers, and obviously they've got, you know, the largest fan base in the world for obvious reasons as well. So, yeah, I think they'll do all right when it's all settled out and some of this lingering money is gone, and when the playing fields are considered level in a few years. I think they'll still be near the top and making a shake for things, which would be good for the sport. I'm sure that there would be many and millions of fans that would love to see Ferrari back on top. So
yeah, including, I think, James, one of them.
More than a year, too, James.
So James, in a kind of Mercedes-heavy podcast, is that a nice positive Ferrari note to end on in terms of...
I always enjoy the few times I hear John talk good about Ferrari, so I'm just soaking it in right now.
Yeah, you're just enjoying your moment.
The season will be here soon, and the 8 weeks.
And normality will be restored. But guys, I think that is probably a very good place to kind of round off this podcast. It's been a fantastic chat in terms of, obviously, we started talking Mercedes history and we've gone into all sorts kind of along the way, and including ending on a bit of the kind of 2021 look ahead with that budget cap. But guys, thank you so much for coming on. We really appreciate it, and we hope you've enjoyed your time on the podcast.
Yeah, we had a great time. You know, thanks for having us on, and we hope to have you guys on our podcast one of these days. Definitely for predictions. Every race preview we do, going in every Grand Prix. We have a prediction section. Typically, I win those. John's not so good at that, but we like to have guest. We like to have guest predictors on. So we'd love it if you guys could fill in one of those roles for us.
No, we would certainly jump at the opportunity to do that, guys. Like I think we said at the start of this podcast, you said that we're just F1 guys that like talking to each other. I think any of us guys that kind of randomly decide, hey, people might like listening to us. Well, we're going to do it anyway. So any chance to talk about F1, we kind of seem to obsess over. So yeah, we'd love to do that, guys. And it, like I said, it's been absolutely brilliant having you on. And if you guys haven't checked out the That podcast, I will lead a link to one of their episodes down below. I'll try and leave one of the most recent and obviously their Twitter handle as well below on this front. Great guys and always enjoyable having a listen to them with that stuff. And guys, if you're new around here, Ash, what can they do?
You can press the subscribe button so our videos go into your YouTube inbox, and then also press that bell icon and get a notification when one of our videos goes live.
And guys, you can comment down below as well on me, Ash, James and Jon. We'd all love to hear your thoughts on obviously this discussion that we had. You know, do you think Mercedes will achieve history this season? Do you think they're kind of likely to leave? Do you think they're unlikely to leave like we did? Who do you think will deal with the 2021 budget cap best out of the two teams of Ferrari and Mercedes? Or anything that we've kind of covered on this basis. It'd just be great to hear from you guys. And yeah, if you've liked it, don't forget, give it a thumbs up. Helps us let us know that you enjoy what we're doing in terms of that front. But guys, once again, thank you, James and Jon, for coming on.
Thanks so much.
No problem.
Thanks again, guys. It's been a pleasure.
No problem at all, guys. And there's only one way for us to round off, and that is, for now, you F1 fans, keep racing.